Well, Glendora, this is episode 6. This estate is really very troubling, of course, and I'm doing this, I want to say again, I'm doing it to let other people know so they're alerted, because this thing is kept very quiet. Everything. They never want anyone to know about this kind of thing going on, because if they can have access to estates where they can get money, they surely don't want people to know about this, what goes on. So anyway, I'm trying to do things according to the calendar, but some of the events that took place are very difficult. Now, what I left off with was that Eddie Jr., my stepson, who had given us quite a bit of problems here all along, and they knew it. They knew about Eddie. He started to, he was getting concerned because there weren't a lot of things happening. So, of course he was concerned, because he got what he tried to get, and he didn't want anyone investigating him any further or trying to sue him. So he wanted this estate closed. I mean, please close it. So he started investigating and stirring up the waters, because things were a little quiet, and he thought, he was going to try to get the estate closed. So it did stir up things a little bit, and at this point, really, I think it was around this point, actually, I had filed papers. My attorney did, the last attorney, Jason Bogley, who had been with the Ray Dowd law firm, had filed papers for me, and they went to, they were transferred supposedly, or we filed them in Westchester, and we also filed them in Poughkeepsie with Dutchess County, since we were transferred up there. And from what we know, they were not filed. We filed them, we filed them, but they were not recorded. And what they did with them, we don't know, whether they buried them or whatever they did with them. It's really a racket. It's an illegal enterprise carried on for a profit. That's really what's going on with these people. So when I filed these papers, I was not informed of any decision of the estate with these filings, which Jason Bogley had done. And we understand that we were told later that the time period had expired, that they hadn't made any decision. Therefore, all our demands in our papers were effectively approved, because they mysteriously either lost them or whatever they did and went over the time period, which makes them effectively approved. So they killed their own purpose, I guess. Some years later, I and one of my group then, when there was no decision or anything, we went to Poughkeepsie Surrogate Court to go through files. And we began making copies of estate pertinent papers in the file, some of which were quite revealing. The chief clerk, who was actually, I guess, quite new there, demanded to see what copies we were making and began going through them. And she said that many things we were copying we had no right to see. Now here I am, the wife, the main beneficiary and executor, and she said I have no right to see them all. Well, what was going on? And proceeded to remove many of the copies, saying, "You cannot see this stuff." However, one of the salient facts that we discovered in these pages was that the former clerk who was there in Poughkeepsie, as I said, did not record the papers. We discovered that. And they were filed, as I say, but they didn't record them. So this new clerk got very excited when we were in there and had another member of the staff, court staff, who was an attorney, sit and closely watch us while we went through some boxes to listen what we said and what we did. Whatever we copied, they examined closely. And of course, she made this statement, "You cannot see this stuff." They had boxes, and I think she was trying to reconstruct the file, actually, because a lot of it was lost or buried in the transfer from Westchester to Poughkeepsie. So she was trying to reconstruct it. And so she said, if you want to come back to this court to go through any more papers, you'll have to make an appointment to examine the papers, and you will be supervised. The situation was very hostile and contentious toward us. As a result, we did believe they were obviously hiding and covering up their misdeeds. You know, Glendora, it's very upsetting, my life, everything I went through with these things, because I was fighting for justice, let's face it. And they didn't like it. They don't want anyone fighting for justice. They want you to say, you know, well, I'll just settle for whatever I can get. Well, no, thank you. I don't do that. Anyway, I'd like to add here that the files, you know, are for public record, and their attitude was definitely exhibited to us by the individuals and officials of the court system that are paid for the public and are paid to work for us. But obviously, they weren't working for us. This should not be the attitude of any public servants in the court. They should be there to try to help you, but they weren't there. The chief clerk we had to deal with, the new one that was there, her name was Erika S. de Traglia, I believe. Traglia. She was the chief clerk and an attorney. Now, in January 2001, this was when Judge Scarpino came into the Westchester court, where we were originally, as a new surrogate. And the court tried to clean up the old cases that had been lingering in that court. Emanuele, who was the judge before Scarpino, as I mentioned it. Ralph Martinelli, the Westchester newspaper owner and publisher, played an important role in trying to help me, really. I mean, he knew my husband very well, and he knew he was an honorable person, and he really felt for me. He tried very hard. And of course, he owned a newspaper, so he could publish anything. He had a meeting with the former judge, Emanuele, and he extracted the important and critical information from Albert Emanuele that White and Case had abandoned my husband's estate when they filed papers approximately 2 months after death, after being designated as an estate attorney, and they represented Bankers Trust, their enduring client, for repayment of a loan from my husband, and it was $500,000, and they took it from the estate. But they represented Bankers Trust. They were their attorney. So there's a big conflict there. How could they be the estate attorney also? And Judge Emanuele pointed that out to Ralph Martinelli, the newspaper publisher. Now, there was another thing that was also wrong, and that he just wouldn't reveal. It was too serious. But we found it out later, as I will let you know. Now, shortly after Judge Scarpino became judge, Leo Malonis, the attorney at Pillsbury Winthrop Law Firm, covering for White and Case, went for summary judgment against the children and my objections, which were filed by my first attorney, Peter Raymond. Leo Malonis and Bankers Trust wanted to throw out all my objections to their accounting. The convicted felon, Bankers Trust Company, and their attorneys failed to reveal that Bankers Trust Company, that had been purchased by Deutsche Bank, had been convicted of 3 federal felonies and could not act as a fiduciary. Mr. Malonis, then former chief administrative judge of the state of New York, produced a certificate of relief from disabilities from the New York State Parole Board, and stated that this was their get-out-of-jail-free card, absolving the bank of all federal felonies, permitting them to act as a fiduciary in their fiduciary capacity. However, we were later informed by a former surrogate judge and former U.S. assistant attorney, and learned that this was all a fraud by Bankers Trust and their attorneys, since the state of New York could not wipe away any felony charges. So the certificate of relief from the New York State Parole Board was just another fraudulent scam by the convicted federal felons, Bankers Trust Company, and their attorneys, to prevent a major revolt and departure of their trust and estates business. I mean, that's what they were trying to cover, of course. The court threw out many of my objections and then tried to force us into a settlement. And this is when the judge's law secretary, Rob DiBella, now Supreme Court judge, asked me what I wanted, as you recall. And that's when my response was justice. His response was, as you may recall, I think I mentioned this before, was, there is no justice in this court. And he went into the other room to speak to Leo Malonis and David Kiko of Pillsbury Winthrop Law Firm, representing the bank. And they did not want to speak to me. He went in the other room and asked them, would they speak to me? They said no, they wouldn't speak to me. I wanted justice, they're not going to speak to me. So now don't you ask yourself, is the fox in charge of the hen house? Isn't the court in charge? Shouldn't they say you must speak to her? It's all getting very clear, isn't it? It's one big happy family. Here I am, the widow, the legal executor, and main beneficiary. And this is just another shovel full of bad faith and disrespect from the convicted federal felons, Bankers Trust Company, and their attorneys, aided and abetted by the surrogate court. They had hatched the scheme to divide and conquer, separating the children from me, which ended up the children settling for a small percentage of what they were supposed to get. And they executed a secret settlement document with the estate, which I was not permitted to see as an executor, and it has been sealed by the court. Also sealed by Wynn Rutherford, White and Case, Bankers Trust, Mr. Malonis, and Mr. Kiko. Now, one of my last attorneys, I added a new attorney by suggestion, who filed an answer to the summary judgment. The judge threw some out, some of my objections. It was all fixed. Again, it was fixed. And another thing I might point out, when you go to new attorneys, and I wouldn't ask anymore. I mean, I could ask, but I mean, I know the answer. But a lot of these attorneys, when you say, do you think you could settle this? Are you able to settle this? They don't look at you straight in the eye, or they kind of talk around it, but they don't answer you. The answer is then you better watch out, because they're not going to settle it, but they'll take your money. Okay, so now we spoke to other victims And they said DeBella, the one who wouldn't have the other side speak to me, said they settled 20 cases. Now these are people that evidently just decided they better settle. What are they going to do for little, whatever they get? So he said, well, we settled 20 cases. However, there is one crazy old lady who will not settle. Well, of course, that was me. And the fella told one of my group, he said, it was Suzanne. So DeBella tried to frighten the children and me by telling us if we do not settle, we'll be in court another 10 years. Well, how about 20 years? Because that's what it's been. So the children got afraid and settled for little, very little. Maybe, I don't know, a tenth of what they were supposed to get. It was very little. By the way, my next attorney was recommended by Stan Smith of Ayers organization. We also worked through them, namely Ray Dowd. He suggested him. Well, I'm going to tell you. Ray Dowd went through the motions. Here's another one of my attorney for 1 year and charged me $250,000 for 1 year. And what he did is he worked constantly, and one of my group was trying to run around and work for him, and we were trying to save money making copies because he was saying what exorbitant money my copies were going to be for the court, and he ended up making many drafts, including a draft trying to get repayment for me for legal fees for fighting my husband's estate as an executor. However, he never filed them. They were all really completed, but he just never filed any of these papers. So actually, all my attorneys set me up for a fall. They take your money and then basically gave up. And they charge you while their meter is running. Of course, I have this written down here, charge me while their meter was running. Some of this I have to read and check because with the years and everything that went on, there's so many little things that I like to make people alerted about, because I think they have a bag of tricks and they really know what they're doing with their tricks, I mean. Another alert I have here, another story. Is Peter Raymond set me up, my original lawyer, who I had for about 3 years, and I paid for the children and myself the legal fees. He sued me for additional legal fees after 3 years. And I showed an interest that I wanted to settle if they could please try. Basically, it ended up they wanted to bankrupt me. I think the bank probably got to them or whatever. And now Peter Raymond had a retainer agreement. He had a deposition when he sued me. He decided he was going to sue me for additional fees. I asked him, I had a meeting with him and Tom Amlick, his partner, and of Hall Dickler, who later the firm went bankrupt, but they were a firm for many years. And I had been with them for 3 years with the children, and I said that we would really like to, have a settlement if they could do it. So anyway, he made a deal evidently with the bank. I really don't know the inside story because I wasn't there, but we put a lot of the pieces together. And he had a retainer agreement with the children that if I stopped paying the legal fees, they would be responsible. Well, when he sued me, he hired this unbelievable attorney, Lenny Benowich, who, you talk about, I call him dirty, but he was something else. He knew what kind of real difficult attorney to hire, of course, because he was attorney in Westchester. They're all in Westchester together, where the court is. It's one big happy family. So anyway, at the deposition he had with Lenny Benowich in charge, and I told him right out at the deposition, he's like a dictator. That's what I told Lenny Benowich. Got furious at me. No, it's like a dictator, like a Nazi. I'm sorry about that word, but these people, the way they treat a human being is unbelievable. Anyway, Peter Raymond, who represented me, couldn't produce a signed retainer from me, which I figured there would be one, of course, but he couldn't produce it. He didn't have it. So, which actually said, if I stop paying, the children are responsible. Well, he didn't want to go after that at all. He was going to let the children, I think the children still had to pay something out of the estate money for legal fees, but the children decided to settle. I had already paid him $200,000, including expenses, I think, approximately. So, now, my notes. Since I was okay, this is getting, I'm sorry, I thought I had this in line, and evidently I went beyond in here. Then I guess when he sued me, through another friend, he had recommended another attorney, Mark Oxman from Westchester. So he came in and he decided he would file answers to a summary judgment that I guess Malonis had put out against me. So that was when DeBella said to the children, you'll be in court for 10 years, and he was trying to convince them to settle. The bank in White and Case, they set me up and got Peter Raymond to sue me for the additional fees. That was it. They were behind it all. Basically, they wanted to bankrupt me, yes. Okay, now Peter Raymond had a retainer, as I said, for the children, but he couldn't produce one for me. He claimed I owed him. He took it, Lenny Benowich, they took it to the Supreme Court Judge Louis Barone, and as we found out later through all this mess, we found out that legal fees should only be settled with the surrogate court, not Supreme Court. So actually everything is null and void, what they did. But they had Lenny Benowich, he brought me to the Supreme Court. So when I learned it was all no good, that was too late, of course, afterwards, since all the estate matters should go to surrogate court. Now, Peter Raymond, when he hired Lenny Benowich, he went so far as to get a court order. Lenny Benowich went so far as to take a court order, and he took my Social Security money out of, which I think was around $37,000, out of my account in Florida, which is a violation of the federal law. Then he also attempted to open my safe deposit box in Westchester County. I hired a private detective to be at the bank, and the bank refused to open the box for Lenny Benowich because his demand had no legal standing. It was harassment and intimidation. Then on top of it, Lenny Benowich attempted to get money out of a Charles Schwab account I had, which was quite a large account, and he was using Judge Barone's paperwork, and Schwab laughed at him and told him it was illegal. So now Lenny Benowich, that dirty attorney, had Judge Barone rule that the Westchester County Sheriff post a notice on the front door of my home that they could seize all my property unless I came up with an exorbitant amount of money. I had two separate attorneys at that point with all this mess, with this horrible thing that went on. I had two separate attorneys, and the Judge Barone called for a private conference with all the attorneys. And I remember he always, in the courtroom, he was always calling for his assistant clerk, who evidently, probably secretary, who was a legal secretary probably. He kept calling her, Amy, Amy, are you here? Amy, where are you? I don't know if the guy was afraid or what, but anyway, we were in a private conference, and anyway, this is something. One of my attorneys, I had two attorneys there, and the judge called for a meeting in the conference room, his back chambers. So we waited outside, and one of my attorneys came out of the conference and said to me, you know, Suzanne, you're really entitled to $100,000 refund from all these legal fees. However, the judge wants you to come up with a bank check of $125,000. So my attorney said, it's not right, but Suzanne, they suggested, even though it's not right, we suggest you pay it to get this all behind you. So I reluctantly agreed, and my attorney went back into the conference room and informed the judge that I would agree to pay the $125,000. Now, when they handed the judge my check, then he said, do you think we could get $50,000 more out of her? The attorney asked the judge if Bankers Trust Company / Deutsche Bank and White and Case in Pillsbury Winthrop were behind this whole dirty deal. And he nodded his head and nodded yes. My attorney said, I'm going to report you. So the judge said, he threatened him. He said, if you're coming back here, you're coming back to the Westchester courts, and I'll get you. And he said, my attorney said, I haven't been here for 20 years, and I won't be back for another 20 years. So he told the judge, don't you dare threaten me. Then the judge retaliated, can't even pronounce my words. I mean, this is just so upsetting to me, and imposed $260,000 in legal fees, and added, listen to this, added interest of $150,000, totaling $410,000. Or, if I didn't pay it, I'd be in danger of losing my home and all my possessions. I think I have to end it here, Glendora. And I will continue in my next dramatic episode. It's quite upsetting. Thank you.